Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon, almost good evening. It's wonderful to see such a large crowd here. Thank you for coming along. I don't think you'll be disappointed. Lord Monckton has drawn enormous crowds in the previous venues where he has spoken, and everybody has been very happy about having come. That is, those who didn't get turned away. Now, there are a few little housekeeping items. If we do have an overflow of people and seats aren't filled, we do have an auditorium at the far end where people can get a direct video link of what's happening in here. And after the session, the way it's structured is that we'll have a short and then a longer presentation and then a question and answer session. And afterwards, if we do use the auditorium, the speakers will move over there to have a short Q&A session with them there. Anyway, now it's my great pleasure to introduce the author of a best-selling book, not only in Australia but elsewhere in the world, and that's Professor Ian Plimer. I don't think he needs a lot of introduction because I'm sure most of you have, or a lot of you will have read his book. Those of you that haven't read his book will find it available in the foyer. There are also some CDs produced by one of the attendees here that are also available at the same desk after the event. So now I'd like to ask Professor Ian Plimer to come up the front and say a few words.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure to see so many people here. And you can also see my contribution to pollution, because here I have a number of my former students from the University of Melbourne who are here, and I've put them out into the world to pollute the world. Lord Monckton has asked me to say a few introductory words about that wonderful word, that wonderful four-letter word, which unites all geologists, and that's the word time. Because over time, climates have changed. They always have changed. And since that very first day on planet Earth, on that Thursday, 4,567 million years ago, climates have always changed. And for more than 80% of time, we have been a warm, wet greenhouse planet. It is unusual to have ice. And the ice we have on planet Earth has appeared 6 times. We've had 6 major ice ages. The first 2 were at sea level, at the equator, at times when the atmospheric carbon dioxide content was 1,000 times more than today. So from geology, straight away we can see there is something fundamentally wrong with carbon dioxide driving climate change. And in fact, for each of those 6 major ice ages, they were initiated when carbon dioxide was much higher than now. And in those former times, we've never had acid oceans, even with very, very high carbon dioxide content. Otherwise, we wouldn't find fossils. The shells would have dissolved. So when we look in geology, we see that there have been great changes over time, and the rate of change and the amount of change has been far greater than anything we measure today. An example, we can see this in the Flinders Ranges, where I'm taking Lord and Lady Monckton for a bit of R&R next weekend. We can see in some places where sea level has risen and fallen. Now, not the miserable millimetre or so that people are having conniptions about. We've had sea level changes of 1,500 metres. That's a sea level change. And we've gone from glaciation to an interglacial when sea temperatures were 40 degrees Celsius, then back into glaciation. That's a climate change. And we are enjoying an ice age. It started 34 million years ago. And during this ice age, we have periods when it's a bit warmer, and we're in one of those, and periods when it's very, very cold. And we can see this. If you forget geology, look at history. In Roman times, we had 600 years of warm climate. Sea level didn't rise, but it was warm, and we know that because they kept good records about agriculture. And it was warmer, probably 5 degrees warmer than now. Then it suddenly got cool. Now, those prosperous Roman times were wonderful. When it got cool, we had famine. We had a breakdown of the social structure. We had depopulation, and the weakened population got hit by the plague. That's what global cooling did. Then it warmed again. The first to feel it were the Vikings, and they grew barley, wheat, and had cattle and sheep on Greenland. Why do you think it was called Greenland? Eric the Red was saying, come to Greenland, wonderful benign climate. He was running a great immigration program. It was warm, and we know it from the depths of graves that were dug. You can't dig a deep grave if there's permafrost. We have very good crop records from Europe, and it was about 5 degrees warmer than now. In the northern hemisphere, in the southern hemisphere, it's probably a little bit less, about 4 degrees warmer. But in the medieval warming, it was warm, considerably warmer than now. Fundamental question, how can we have the Roman warming and the medieval warming when there was no carbon dioxide emitting industry? How can we have that? Clearly carbon dioxide participates, which Lord Monckton will talk about, but it doesn't drive climate change. And then we bounced out of that medieval warming that the hockey stick was meant to try to get rid of. And if you try to change history, you do so at your peril. And we bounced into the Little Ice Age, about 1300 AD, and it got cold. And we had depopulation, we had starvation. The European population got hit by the plague in 1347 AD. It was a miserable time to live. And we had even colder periods when the sun got lazy. And so we can see by looking back in time, previous climates have been driven by what happens with supernova eruptions, what happens with the sun giving out different amounts of energy, what happens with the Earth's orbit changing, what happens with the oceans and the continents changing. In the past, we have never had a climate change driven by carbon dioxide. So if you put up the extraordinary hypothesis that carbon dioxide drives modern climate change, you need extraordinary evidence. Now, as my former students will tell you, I'm a patient man, but I'm still waiting for that evidence. So we have had, for the last 300 years, a period of warming. Well, if we have record temperatures, what do you think you get at the end of a period of warming? This is the time where Lord Monckton will start to talk to us from about 1850 onwards, and to use his skills. My skills are in looking backwards. Well, that's the fortunate life of a geologist, dealing with this wonderful four-letter word time. But Lord Monckton, educated at Harrow, then Churchill College in Cambridge, did something that many people here should have done. He got a real education in classics and mathematics and, of course, philosophy, and that education allows you to pull apart an argument. And he will be pulling apart arguments about humans driving climate based on having a very solid education. He's also got qualifications in journalism and has worked for many years as a journalist in various groups. And he's worked in the Science Policy Unit of the Prime Minister and Margaret Thatcher's Policy Unit in 10 Downing Street. And he's also been a science advisor to an education advisor to Margaret Thatcher's government. But some of his greater claims to fame are really quite obscure. You're in the presence of a remarkable man. Now, this man invented a mathematical puzzle. And if anyone solved it, they got paid £1 million. And he's a man true to his word. It was solved and he paid up the £1 million. But he's not a total fool. He invented another mathematical puzzle, a little bit more difficult, and if you solve it, it's £2 million. So we're dealing with a man who's had an extraordinary education, a man who is true to his word, and a man who wants to talk about three things tonight. The science behind human-driven climate change, the economics of an ETS, and the last point, which we hear so little about, are the moral issues. So I ask Melburnians to welcome the third Viscount Monckton of Brenchley to come to the stage and to address us. Thank you.